welcome to Leadership Speaking Radio, the podcast for leaders and change makers who want to learn how to communicate with impact, authenticity, and human connection to their peers, teams, and customers in order to build better relationships, better their bottom lines, and become better leaders. My name is Dr. Laura Penn. I'm the founder of the Leadership Speaking School, and I'm your host. Visit the website, theleadershipspeakingschool.com, to find out more about how we can support you to show up as the best version of yourself every time you speak. Now, let's get straight into our topic. Welcome back. We are in another episode. I am titling this episode Presence Craft, and this is episode number 55. My, oh my, aren't we doing a lot of work together? I hope that you have been busy in between these episodes. I hope that you have been saying yes to every speaking opportunity that comes your way and playing inside of the craft of leadership communication with every opportunity. Oh yes, oh yes, oh yes. This season is all about going in to the craft work of what leadership communication entails. It's inspired from the book that I have written called Nowhere Left to Hide, Leadership Communication Skills That Every Leader of the Digital Age Must Know. And it's available on Amazon as a Kindle. And oh man, I'm just so excited to do this work with you here, to get real about what it takes to speak with impact and authenticity and human connection. And I hope you took away a lot from the last episode about preparation, which is, of course, kind of the prerequisite to doing a good job in speaking your words that you've created in the content creation bucket. So this episode is going to go now into the more performance-related elements that are related to the craft of leadership communication. And these three performance elements are presence, voice, and body. And to start the work in this triad, I want to get into presence. Now, I'm not going to talk about presence per se as much as I have done in other episodes of this podcast. There's one in particular, you'll see it. It says presence in capital letters. Go in there. I forget what episode number it is, but you can find it easily in the library of episodes for this podcast. Go in there to really harvest what presence is. In this version of me talking about presence craft, I want to be giving you kind of a larger worldview of it. And I want to stimulate how you think about it. Yeah? So does that intrigue you? Are you curious to know more? Well, here it is. This is my download. Now, I'm sure that you have heard of the freeze, fight, or flight response. Yeah? This is the innate, built-in response that all living creatures have to danger. Mortal danger, I may add. And I want to preface this description that I'm about to give you of the freeze, fight, or flight response by saying that when people feel like they are in danger when they're communicating in front of others, they will do whatever it takes to survive. So let's get back to the freeze, fight, or flight response, shall we? Would it surprise you to hear that when people are communicating in front of others and they feel that mortal fear of danger, and they are there in that moment, that they adopt the freeze, fight, or flight response? They adopt one of the three. And this is, folks, oh man, when I figured this out, when I realized that this is what's going on, it changed how I teach this topic, and it changed how I talk about presence. So you're receiving this kind of new version of me thinking about this. Yes, I can't count how many leaders and change makers I have worked with and or seen who are in a mode of surviving when they are communicating in front of their audiences. And this mode of surviving takes on either the freeze or the fight or the flight response. Yes. What does it look like? If they are adopting the freeze response in their survival mode for communication, everything goes rigid. They hold their breath. They squeeze and contract every muscle that is squeezable or contractible in their body, and tension rules. And you know by now that tension is the enemy of connection. So the freeze response, there it is, everything is tight and tense, and they speak, and you barely hear what they are saying. Yes, that's me speaking like I'm holding my breath with all of my muscles contracted in my body. You can't hear what they're saying. And the whole purpose of the presentation becomes moot. Because if you can't hear what somebody is saying, what is the point? This is a version of what I see in the people that I observe or work with, that they have been using this habitual response of surviving, of freeze response and freeze, fight, or flight as a survival tool to speak to their audiences. And here's some bad news. This doesn't work. It's an ineffective way to communicate. And it doesn't bring the message even out of their body, let alone into the room. So that's what the freeze response looks like in communication. And remember, this is an innate, built-in response to fear or danger that all creatures have. And our creatures, being us humans, this is what it looks like when we're using this survival technique to communicate. So what does fight or flight look like? You might be asking. Very intriguing. And it also looks something related to what's happening with the breath. So in the freeze response, the fact that the person is holding their breath, that serves everything else to contract. Well, in the fight or flight response, what the breath is doing influences what everything else is doing in the body. So here, the person takes in a very large gulp of oxygen, preparing themselves, their body, for a violent physical reaction. Because let's face it, taking flight, which is running away, or fighting, is a violent physical reaction. So there they are, breathing large, gulping in the air, maybe even stealing the air of the people around them to prepare themselves for this big action. And when they speak, that air and all of the energy behind it gets sprayed out over the audience like a spray can with no focus, just everywhere. And then, like the aerosol from a spray can, just evaporates up into the ceiling and out of the room. What really happens is that message is spewed out over the audience with no focal point, and then it dissipates, leaving nothing behind. People don't remember what was said. It's just like a bunch of hot air just came into the room and evaporated. So you can guess my next point, which is this mode of communication, the fight or flight response, is also a really ineffective way to communicate because the message, in this case as well, doesn't stay in the room. To summarize, these states of survival, these states of reaction, innate reaction to mortal danger by people who are speaking in front of others, are tragically deficient and they don't work. So what does? Well, this is where we come back to the whole point of this podcast episode, which, remember, I'm calling presence craft. That's a little clue. What works? If you are in the freeze response, you are not present with the audience. You are only present with yourself. And it's an internal relationship. What's going on in your inside world is what matters. If you are in the fight or flight response, you are not present with your audience. You are speaking above and beyond them. And that message doesn't land, as I've already established. So what's needed in order for you to communicate so that it does land at your target, which is the hearts and minds of your audience, what's needed is for you to, number one, be present. Yeah. For you to be there, in the room, awake, aware, alert, accessible, and at the ready. This is the key ingredient that is missing from the other two examples of survival mode. And in the craft of leadership communication, learning how to be present is the first stage of learning in this delivery performance bucket, right? So this isn't about the content creation bucket anymore. This is the delivery performance bucket. And you have to learn how to be present. You have to learn the techniques for how to be there in that moment, switched on. And this is not something I can teach you in a podcast. This is something I can teach you in my masterclass. This is something I can teach you in my 3-day program in Leadership Speaking Core. This is embodied work that you need to learn in order to switch that presence on and to keep it on for the duration of your speaking. And I always say, and I know you've heard me say this before if you've listened to my podcast over the years, I always say that your speaking performance begins the moment that you start to get up out of your chair. Yeah, when that butt cheek lifts off of the chair, your performance begins. And this is where you now need to switch on your understanding and awareness of the craft of presence. How do you show up present with your audience from that moment? And there you are, not only standing up now, but you're walking to your speaking position. And you're settling in there and you're breathing the room, as I like to say. And then you start speaking. And then your presence needs to be maintained the whole time. And you do this until you are done talking and you return to your chair, and then you can go back into your modus operandi from before you were giving your performance. So there it is, that this layer of presence is needed as the ground zero for all of your speaking opportunities. And to learn what this is about embodying the work and trying it out. Hey, for a little bit of help there, go back to that episode. Again, I forget which number it was. Go back to the episode where I have the word presence in capital letters, and you will learn Patsy Rodenberg's method for what presence is, the definition, that there is first circle presence, second circle presence, and third circle presence. Learn from there, and if you want to know even more than that, I go into great detail about what these types of presence are and what they look like in the new book that I've written, Leadership Communication Skills that every leader of the digital age must know, right? Nowhere left to hide. So that's what I want to say about presence in this episode, that this is something that you need to be aware of and know how to use. But I think it's kind of fun to end this podcast episode with a little quiz that I also have in my book that I want to do with you here to kind of take the temperature of where you are in space and time with your presence right now. So this quiz is going to ask you a few yes or no questions. And in your mind's eye, you answer yes or you answer no. Let's take the temperature to see where you are. Are you somebody who under delivers in presence, which would be the first circle of presence in Patsy Rodenberg's language? Or are you somebody who over delivers in presence, which is the third circle of presence in the Patsy Rodenberg definition? And for our purposes, going back to the beginning of this episode, the freeze response is the same as the first circle, FYI, and the fight or flight response is the same as the third circle. Okay, so let's do this little quiz together. All right, so you answer yes or no to these questions. Question number 1. Do you mumble when you speak and have people ask you to repeat yourself because they can't understand you? Yes or no? Question number 2. Do you hold your breath when you are listening to others? Yes or no? Question 3. Do you try to please others by minimizing yourself? Yes or no? Question 4. Do you hide your feet under your chair? Yes or no? So these questions are all related to being in the freeze response, under-delivering, first circle, okay? Interesting to see what happens next. So now we're going to head over to the third circle, presence, as Patsy Rodenberg describes it, and to the fight or flight response. So listen carefully. Do you feel tired after interacting with others? Yes or no? Do you judge others when they are talking instead of listening to them? Yes or no? Do you make noise when you breathe? AKA getting ready for violent physical action? Yes or no? Do you laugh and speak much louder than others around you? Yes or no? Do you find yourself pushing your voice out so much that your throat hurts? Yes or no? And the final question, do you take up a lot of physical real estate with your body and with your possessions? Yes or no? Ta-da! That was the quiz. If you answered yes to that first body of questions about under-delivering, freeze response, that means you're kind of in that sector of speaking. You may be using the freeze response, that survival response, more than you want to in communicating with others. And if you answered yes in the second part, in the second section, with questions related to the fight or flight response, if you answered yes to most of those questions, I have some news for you. You are probably operating in the survival mode of fight or flight. Bah. So there we are. Obviously, if you answered no to most of those, then this isn't about what you're doing in freeze, fight, or flight. This is about you probably being quite present already. Well done. You don't need this podcast episode. But if you were on the outer limits of the trajectory of freeze and fight or flight, you need to be working inside this craft. You're in the right place. And I hope that in successive podcast episodes that you can continue to try things out of the craft elements that I'm sharing with you. I hope that you can find things that really work for you, have awareness of what these options are, and then get to work, get really busy using these elements, saying yes to every opportunity that you have to give a talk using the craft that I'm teaching you. So this is where I want to leave you in this episode. I hope that you got something out of it, guys. This is a really important episode to kind of just take the temperature of this idea of presence craft and to understand where you are in the spectrum of things, and also to understand that this is a ground zero positioning for the first thing that you need to work on when it comes to the performance of how you speak. You need to be thinking about presence first, that energy that you bring into the room. Because you are responsible for your presence. You are responsible for the energy that you bring into the room. Be it a virtual room or a live room, it's all on you, on how you show up in there. So that's gonna do it for this episode. I hope that you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed delivering it. Subscribe now to Leadership Speaking Radio to be sure not to miss an episode. And don't forget to visit the website, theleadershipspeakingschool.com, to learn more about how we can support you to show up as the best version of yourself every time that you communicate with your peers, teams, and customers. And hey, if you are enjoying the content and learning and living what we are doing here in this podcast, please recommend it to other people to your network of friends and colleagues so that they too can benefit from the work that we are doing together. And if you're really, really enjoying it, why not give this podcast a 5-star rating so that other people can find it and benefit from it as well. So that does it for me, folks. I hope that you got a lot out of this episode, and I hope that you continue to say yes to every speaking opportunity that comes your way. Because remember, communication is supposed to feel good. So let's use this craft to make that happen. Thanks for listening. I'll talk to you next time.